So that'll record for us. And so, um, yeah, so here we are on welcome to Activate Belonging. And I'm here with Trish. How are you doing today? We just
I'm doing very well, thank you.
we were just talking about the weather a minute ago, so this is almost like a double take. So we were going to talk about, like the identity of being adopted, and I'm so glad that you wanted to be here with me and just kind of talk this over because there's so many different angles. Um, I'm sure you will agree. There's just so many different ways that we see ourselves. It's funny because I just recorded something about how I felt like my identity had been adopted from my adoptive parents and how it's taken a while for me to really like dig into who I really am and sort it out. And one of the things that I said is that in this morning's reverie is like I never liked scratchy wool sweaters and my parents loved them. And so like I grew up and they loved, they were like um my father was a carpenter and they loved to go backpacking and that was never my thing. So, in talking about this today, I hope that anyone who sees it will kind of begin to think about identity and, you know, what it's meant to them. But do you want to start with just telling me your adoption story?
Sure, I was adopted when I was 5 months old, and my biological parents were college students, and this I was born in 1969. Actually, I was born in 1970. I was conceived in 1969, and they were a biracial pair. So my biological mother is white, and my biological father is black. I was not obviously a planned baby. I was the result of a single night of this, pair of individuals being together. And so, that my biological mother made the choice to put me up for adoption, and then I guess her story kind of goes further from there, just in terms of how she and the man that she was with, I don't think that their relationship was something that continued on. I think there was a lot of um, issues surrounding, him being black and her being white. And so from the very beginning, I now know by looking at some recent adoption documentation that I actually received in the past week and a half. Um, I was referred to throughout this whole um, like 10, 14 pages of paperwork as her problem. And
Wow.
the caseworker the whole time refers to her problem, her problem, her problem. And so the thing that's been on my mind recently has been, did I absorb that notion of being a problem?
Wow, that is very powerful, especially like sharing. Thank you for sharing something that just came in for you, like, hot off the presses, basically, like as we, because I think a lot of us are constantly doing research, like we rest and we absorb what we've known, and we always kind of reach out a little bit more. I don't know if you relate to that, that we're always kind of have our tentacles out for what else could I find, and then you discover this. Um, I was going to ask how you identify yourself. Has that ever like subconsciously come out of your mouth, or have you ever thought of yourself as a problem? Has that ever?
Um, I think I'm still sort of trying to mine for that information. I'm not really sure. I do feel in some ways, um, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm still trying to figure out if it um, if I feel like a problem or if it's just some unresolved solution.
Hmm.
I don't know. That's an interesting kind of question and sort of an interesting to think about. And I'm talking and thinking at the same time. Usually I'm a little bit more like planned out, but I have, just received this information and have been kind of trying to figure out, what
Maybe.
that means.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, where do you place that in your psyche and in your understanding of yourself? And, it's, I felt like you were really articulate about your, explaining. And this is often a part of, I think, being adopted is having this ability to kind of like stand back and describe how your parents were these students and, it wasn't a long-term relationship and just sort of almost like a reporter or observer of something that really is your roots, but you have to be the observer all the time. And so for you, how have you identified yourself? I noticed that you mentioned your mom is white and your father black. Have you, how have you identified, like ethnically, culturally, racially? Did that come in for you as something that did you identify in a specific way?
Well, so I was transracially adopted. So my adoptive family is white. And so I grew up as, for all intents and purposes, I guess, as a white girl, like that's where I identified because that's what I knew. When I was young, when I was in elementary school from kindergarten until fifth grade, I was at a school that was integrated. It was in the city of Denver. And at that point of my life, my friends were probably a mix of Black and white. I felt probably more comfortable and able to be myself. My best friend was actually also biracial.
Mm,
And so I think that is probably the last time that I really had that feeling of belonging,
mm,
um, or the thought that I wasn't thinking about it at all. And I think that might be the privilege of belonging is when you don't have to think about it. Because ever since then, I've had to think about it. When I was in fifth grade, my mom and dad had been divorced for about 3 years, and my mom had met somebody new and remarried. And so we moved to the suburbs. And where we lived was all white. And
mm,
so at that point, that was when I really had to start thinking about it.
mhm,
And I had to start thinking about, okay, how do I fit into this group? And how do I become more white? And how do I become, the person that can, just kind of not stick out? When I got to the school in fifth grade, I had an afro. Um, and then after that, my stepmom, I would see my dad and my stepmom on the weekends. And I think I shared with her, kind of how I was feeling. And so she helped me, do a little bit with my hair, which meant put it into two little puff balls on the side of my head. So I had little like they were ponytails, but they weren't ponytails because they were definitely puff balls. Um, but she kind of helped me, get into that identity. But I think it also became a time when um, it was very much impressed on me that if I wanted to fit in, I was going to have to be white because I was living in a white world at that point. And from then on, it kind of remained that way. Um, so for the most part, internal identity has been white, while my external identity, what people see of me, is either they have a big question mark because they don't
mhm.
know what to think.
Yeah.
And I've been asked a million times, "What are you?" um and or they see me as Black. And so it's really been an interesting and difficult contradiction, I guess, to
Mhm.
try to place my own identity. And I think that for most of my life, I have just struggled to figure out what where I fit.
Mhm.
Um, and it didn't really dawn on me until like in the past 5 years to really start questioning how that shaped who I have become, the way that I have felt, the way that I've tried really hard to fit in. It's opened up a lot of questions for me.
That's interesting. The last 5 years have really highlighted that for you. You know, the reason I was laughing out loud about the puff balls is I had them too. You know, my mother would put these two puff balls or one puff ball. In fact, I'm still wearing it. So, but you know, there's so much to unpack here, Trish, because it's like the first thing you said is I grew up as white, and I was curious whether your adoptive family, your adoptive mom was like, you know, you are like us, like you are one of us. And so you kind of had that assumption, or did that happen because then you had this, you know, more of a multicultural experience in school when you were fairly young. I mean, boy, I envy that so much because I stuck out like a sore thumb. And in my, you know, it was just miserable in my early childhood to go to public school because I was surrounded by blonde, blue-eyed Finnish Lutheran kids, and they were like, you know, looking at me the whole time, like, "What are you? What are you?" And they didn't have the language except "What are you?" But that "What are you?" I've had that question so many times, um, and so I'll let you answer that about like the family sort of bypassing that you're a person of color in that you have color in you and sort of I know maybe you were helped with your hair and stuff, but did you also receive the message like don't worry about that being, you know, you are like us or something?
So I mean, I think there were a few questions in there. First, for it being 1969 and transracial adoptions being not as common as they are today, my mom really tried hard to understand my heritage and to welcome it. One of the reasons that, so she found me in an article in the newspaper. There were a group of children who were, they were having trouble adopting
Hmm.
because we were all biracial.
Hmm.
And my mom read that, and she had recently taken a course on African American history at the women's college near our house. Um, and because she was trying to finish college as an adult, she left college early with my dad to go to med school. So she was working on her degree into her 30s. And I think she might have graduated when she was in her 40s. But anyway, so
Hmm.
she had just taken a course about African American history, and she really loved it. And she found that she was really drawn to um, just kind of the struggles and the triumphs of that community. And so she was she actually, I think, was a little bit before her time in terms of being aware that she needed to raise a daughter with both identities.
Yeah.
And my first baby doll that she got me, Mimi is what I called her, was Black.
Mm.
My mom bought me, she bought me a book about Jackie Robinson and how he shattered the race expectations in the sport of baseball. She didn't want me to get rid of my afro. Like she insisted that I wear an afro because she felt that these were the things that would help me understand that connection to the half of me that was Black, or whatever percentage you want to put on it, but to help understand that other part of my racial heritage. And so she was she was really on board. And where we lived, and the school that I went to was a good place to make this happen. But unfortunately, life happens. And my parents got a divorce, and my mom was of that generation where she didn't go to school necessarily for a career. She was married and taken care of by a husband while she took care of the family. And but she found herself, I think, in a new situation that was probably really uncomfortable, knowing that now she not only had to take care of herself, but she had to take care of her children, and she had to figure out how she was going to make a career. And I think that was one thing that drove her probably to getting married, and also staying married, even though the marriage was not a positive marriage. And so that's sort of when the wheels kind of started falling off, of that, raising me as equally identifying on two different sides of me. And so that, her attention, I think, was pulled away by the fact that there were so many other things that she was needing to focus on, that being able to focus on my identity and the growth of my identity, and the just the way I felt about it, that wasn't as intentional as it was when I was, from 5 months until 10 years old.
Yeah.
So, that's really when things changed for me in terms of feeling like I, belonged, and it became more about fitting in. And then I think it's sort of like a runaway train from there. You start identifying with one way of being, or you feel that you have to identify with that way, and then you go all in. And so I went all in as, trying to be white and fitting in with my white friends in a white suburb in a white world. And you know I just kept on doing that. That's what I knew. That's how I, faced the world, I guess.
What did that look like for you to try to fit in? Like, are there some specifics? Was it like hair related? Because I know hair for me has been huge. I wrote about hair. I've been writing about hair since my 30s. In fact, used to put like my mom's half slips on my head and pretend I had, silky hair. I'd be like flipping my hair. And then I had this like wig obsession, although I never really wore them around like out, but I have like a collection of wigs, and a lot of them are red, and my biological mother had red hair. So there's this whole like mystique about long red hair. And um did you, like in your life, like what did trying to fit in to be white really mean to you? Was it like having just the adapting to your friends and their excitements and how they express themselves, and how they looked? Did you try to look like them, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, it's funny that you would say that about your hair, but that is, I think, when you have lighter skin,
Hmm.
as a biracial individual, the tiebreaker is your hair.
That's a good, I've never thought about that, but I felt like, because I grew up with like, my friends saying they would just pick apart parts of me. They would be like, if it weren't for your nose, you'd look like us. And it's really just your hair. You're almost the same shade. Maybe you'll get whiter as you get older. I mean, I was given a lot of comments as a small child. There was nobody when I went to kindergarten. I was just really different from them in this way, even though I am, maybe objectively fairly light-skinned person in the realm of color. But so I began to, my hair was a target for me, like in my own mind. I was like, I've got to figure this stuff out.
Yes, and that's the same way that I felt. And so I started, relaxing my hair, straightening it at the age of 12,
Oh,
and
wow.
have now relaxed it my entire life.
Mm,
And I have tried in the past few years to grow it out.
mhm,
Um, but it's so ingrained in me,
mm,
this whiteness and straight hairedness and
mm,
this experience, that it's still very uncomfortable for me to honor this other part of me. It's something that I strive for.
mhm,
But I think when you add up all of the experiences that have happened from, say age 10 to age 55, um, it's a lot, and you don't just overcome it in a minute. You know what I mean? It's
mhm,
something that it takes a lot of time, and it takes confidence, and it takes, settling in and understanding your identity. And that is something that I mean, I knew what I was feeling. I was feeling some sort of shame, I think, around, being part Black when, everyone around me was different. And I don't know why it had to be shame. It was, as much as it was difference, it was shame. Um, and I don't know why. I mean, I do know why. I mean, there are some things that have happened, I guess, that I'm still trying to decide how to share them. That kind of brought that shame on, maybe, but it is something that I am continually
mhm,
unpacking and
mhm,
trying to understand. And I didn't realize until um, George Floyd was killed, um, that there is another identity. There's the Black identity, there's the white identity, but then there's the biracial identity within me. I'm talking about, I'm not talking about the whole world. I'm talking about within myself. Um, and that this biracial, or mixed or interracial, however you refer to it, um, is something completely different than the white experience, and it's completely different than the Black experience. It's actually its own experience. And I didn't realize that. And I say when George Floyd was killed because, we were listening, on the internet and on TV about the Black experience, and these are things that happen while being Black, and sort of the microaggressions or the injustices or the things that have happened to the Black community all this time. But I hadn't experienced any of that. Um, but I also hadn't experienced the ease of being white,
mhm,
and experiencing like life like it looked when I looked out at my friends. And
mhm,
I'm not saying their lives were easier or harder or anything than me, but it didn't seem so seamless. There was some place in between that being Black and being white, and I had never looked at it before as if this was something different, because it was always about checking one box. Like when you were
yeah,
growing up, it's always about checking, oh, are you going to check the white box, or are you going to check the Black box? And you
mhm,
have to choose, because in the 70s and the 80s and even in the 90s, there wasn't an other box or a more than one race box or biracial box. It was one or the other. And so for me, I, I checked the white one because that's what I knew, but I
mhm.
didn't I didn't realize, and I didn't give myself permission, because I didn't think I had permission, because I didn't think there were words to describe the fact that there's something in between there that we weren't acknowledging.
I grew up just telling people that I was Black, and it would come from people looking at me and, um, me supplying them with what they were uncomfortable about because I could feel the discomfort. And they're like, well, where, who are your parents and where are you from? I was like, well, I'm adopted. And the first thing they would say is, I'm sorry. And then they would say, well, what are you? And then they would say, and so I learned how to say I'm Black. But I'll tell you, when you mentioned shame, um, it reminds me that um, when I was a kid, Roots, I don't know if you remember Roots, but Roots
Mhm.
came on television on the black and white
Yeah.
TV sets, and my adoptive parents thought they were doing me a favor. They were like they were both very like had master's degrees in history and science, and so they were very into education and history, and they were like, let's sit you down. Okay, now girls, this is your these are your people, this is your history. And then I'm watching like people in chains and torture and separation and trauma. And so for me personally, like I remember at 9 years old being like, I don't want these to be my ancestors. I felt shame that that's what people might see when they looked at me because I had watched that miniseries. And not that the people in my parents' world were like necessarily looking at me like that, but there were the strangers, and I had this like Roots saga image in my psyche after that, and I was like, oh my goodness, that's what people are seeing when they look at me. They see some part of that. So I don't know for you if something in pop society or like television or movies also gave you a sense of shame that you couldn't figure out where this came from. But I remember that for myself.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of subconscious words and pictures and actions and thoughts and all of these things that kids pick up on a lot.
Yeah,
You
true.
can't you don't think they do, or you don't think that people say all the time, well, kids are resilient. They are, but they also hold on to things.
Hmm.
And it might just be a feeling that they can't understand, and I think that for me, I held on to these feelings that I might not have understood, but now that they are talked about with regularity, when I'm at work and people talk about belonging, and it's, where you feel free to bring your whole self to work. And I think, I really have never brought my whole self anywhere. Um, and that is partially due to, my heritage, but it's also, due to a disability that I acquired when I was 31, and I was hit by a car and paralyzed from the chest down. So I use a wheelchair. So
Yeah,
now it's not only race, but on top of that, there's a
yeah,
disability, and either way you look, it's there's a lot of marginalization happening, and the messages, they're just constant. You feel them all the time, even when nobody's saying something to you exactly. But for instance, if I go to a building and there are stairs in front of the building and they say, oh, the accessible entrance is around back, and around back is in
oh,
a dark alley with a bumpy street that hasn't been paved over in 30 years, and you go into a freight elevator so you can go up to the floor that you need to be on. um, that's a message. That's not just a
yeah,
thing that you do to get inside a building, but that's a message that's coming to you that's saying, you're less than, you should be shamed, for being that way, because that's not normal. That's not how people
mhm,
are.
mhm,
And so I think that I have felt that um, for my, almost my entire life, like I said, like that
yeah,
short experience of elementary school for, 4 years or so, but I was too young to really even, I think, know to pay attention, but right around the time where I think you do a lot of your identity development, maybe around your 10 to 13 year old time, um, I had major changes and had to develop an identity around that.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, so really I've carried that stress and that
Mhm.
shame and that discomfort and that feeling of I don't fit in anywhere.
Mhm.
I've carried that with me for my entire life basically, and so trying to unravel that will probably take the rest of my life. If I've just
Yeah.
started on that journey,
Mhm.
it's going to take a long time to unravel those feelings.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a lifelong process. I was even thinking as you were talking that those of us are who are mixed race are like a bridge between two worlds in a sense that we don't come from a black or a white experience really, and it's it's almost like leading the way and becoming a leader of a way of being where your identity is not dependent on people being able to recognize themselves in you, because I think that it's just really hard to have to do that, and it makes you feel more like an outsider. I was going to tell you too that I when I discovered hair straighteners, oh my God, and it was in my 20s, and I straightened my hair for like 10 years, maybe 13 years. And then when I decided to go to Los Angeles and write my own material and do some acting, it was just at the beginning when like hair texture like mine was kind of getting in or something. And so I just like made this leap into curly hair. And so I kind of have been there ever since. It's funny because recently I got bored with it and I was like straightening again a little bit. But I went curly for a long time, and I remember being excited that I had a way to fit in through having just straight hair. And then I remember being excited that I could just like let my hair kind of do its own thing. And it was kind of freeing. That was like in my early 30s. And yeah, it's interesting. I definitely feel like this is a path that other people don't necessarily give you permission to just inhabit everything. This bridge motif that I like to use, it's like, hmm, you know, it's there's pressure. I think there's pressure to, like you said, like at a certain point in our lives to just fit in, keep up with how, make other people comfortable in the dominant culture. But at
Right.
the same time, like there have been moments like when George Floyd was killed, I that was a very pivotal, seminal moment for me, I, well, all of those years really where there were those sort of assassinations going on. And during that period, I started to feel really self-conscious when I would post something like about, I remember there was someone who was in the media, or she was in, she was, I don't remember if she was a reporter, and she was a person of color, and she threw herself off of a building. And I remember that I would put on social media, like very transparently, like not another person of color, being killed or, dying this way. What a loss. And I felt this distinct feeling that this doesn't make sense, but I felt this distinct feeling that the community or the people who were seeing it, like I was saying it in a white world. And they were like, not only like, well, that is sad, but all deaths are sad. Or they would say, I would feel like this would be the feeling is, well, why are you so upset about George Floyd? And so I felt this like weird feeling like, am I allowed to express my feelings about various things in the way that I choose, that really is going to be cathartic for me, and not like constantly saying things that are going to be appropriate for different parts of the culture watching? Not that I'm
Well,
and being watched, but even the idea that we're being watched for everything we say and do. Do you kind of know what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's almost that, well, you're not black enough to, you know, uh, empathize with the black community. You know what I
Mm,
mean? It's
yeah.
like you're too dark to be white, but you're too white to be black. And what do you know about
Hmm.
empathizing with this community when you don't necessarily look just like them?
Hmm.
And I think that's sort of, like I felt like I just kind of kept my mouth shut because I felt like I
Mm.
can't say anything because
Mm.
people know me in a white context. And if
Oh.
they know me in a white context, then why they
Huh.
wouldn't understand the black part of my identity.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's part of, I was talking about my a book that I'm working on, a memoir about being between privilege and marginalization, because
Yeah. Yeah.
I grew up in a upper middle class white
Mm-hmm.
family,
Mm-hmm.
so by all accounts I should be privileged. But on the other hand, I grew up not being able to be myself because I was part black. Um, and to me, that's the part of being marginalized, and to have people look at you and decide who you are based on your hair, or,
Mm-hmm.
without even knowing how you feel with this sort of split identity within you. Um, People make a lot of decisions on who you are by the outside. And again, that back to my disability, I have felt that um, a lot with my disability, because people decide what I'm capable of and how smart I am and how
Yeah.
able I am to do a particular job, and
Mm-hmm.
how I can get around my community. All of these things are the assumptions that people make
Mm-hmm.
based on what I look like. And so um, I just feel like it's a difficult tightrope that we walk, trying to get people to understand that there's more to our identities than meets the eye.
Yeah.
But
Boy,
I but I think people are more apt, again, to just check one box.
yeah, I think it's easier. I mean, I think that in a, you know, we live in a world that is complex, and if people don't have to go out of their way to understand a complexity in front of them, they won't. And so I think it's up to us to really I guess I was going to say have the tools, but maybe we have to develop the tools as who we are to handle these conflicts that, it's like we're riding this wave and it's not an easy one. It's not an easy one. And you have the added element of what you're calling your disability, this, and then how that projects or how people project onto you and allow you to have and easy access, to get into a place and to feel really comfortable and good. And then, I think the world in general is trying to be inclusive, but maybe it's just it defaults to something that isn't. And so as far as like what tools have come up for you that have helped you to navigate the conflicts? And I don't expect you to have the answer all worked out. I'm just curious, like, is there a way that you help yourself feel good in the midst of this, like trying to um, understand fully and accept all parts of yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the biggest tool that I have used has just been my ability to connect with people, and that I always take the time to try to connect with people, even if it's people that like kids that I met at camp, and I spent 2 weeks with. Like, I would write letters to them and try to keep in touch. And friends from elementary school, I still have a handful of those friends that I still spend time with and hang out with. And so for me, it's just about, I have to do all the legwork of connecting to feel that I can at least, fit in. And I think it's always been, my desire to fit in and my desire
Mm,
to, be around other people and
mm,
to, have that connection. So I've always taken it upon myself to do that and to try to stay connected with people that I, meet or come across, because otherwise, eh, I mean, what do you have if you don't have connection? And
okay.
because I don't feel like there's just this one crowd that I can slip into and,
Uh,
take it for granted that it's always going to be
mm,
there.
mhm,
I've always put in a lot of work, to keep it
mhm.
there.
So maintaining connections with others, does that help you feel more connected to you?
I don't necessarily think it makes me feel more connected to me, but it keeps me from feeling lonely, or because I had a lot of feeling of loneliness, like, um, late in elementary school and into middle school. I had a lot of times when I felt very lonely because I realized that I just didn't fit in. Um, and so I think I've just, it's sort of a, defense mechanism, I guess, against loneliness,
Yeah.
is to connect, like preemptively connect before, somebody can disconnect.
Wow. Well, that's saying a lot too. That's like packing a lot in. So, yeah, what does belonging mean to you, right? Like just in this moment, like just fresh, hot off the presses. What
I,
does it bring
I
up
you
on
know,
this?
I think it means not having to think
Yeah,
about
yeah,
who you're with and
yeah,
what you look like,
yeah.
in the moment, and how you feel,
Mhm,
and just, yeah, just not having to think about it. And when I look back on those few years in elementary school, like, I didn't I didn't have to think about it so much. Like, I mean, the reason why I hated my afro was because I looked like a boy, not because I looked like I was black. Whereas that at one point changed
mhm,
to, the reason why I didn't like my hair was because it made me look like I was black and I wasn't comfortable in that
mhm,
body.
mhm,
And so I think it's really, you know, again, a privilege to feel like you can just be you. And I feel like I have to straighten my hair and, press it flat and then curl it and then, do all of the things so that I can fit in to the world where I am most comfortable, because it's where I've been. Like, I lost that community of friends who were black when I left elementary school, and um that was a really important community for me, and I don't have that anymore. And it's something that I have, started to develop at work, with another just group of women who, are part of our Black professionals network. And, just being able to be like, okay, I can try to hang here and I can hang in the other groups too, but I
mhm.
don't think I'll ever feel 100% like I belong somewhere. I
Mm.
don't. I don't. It's sad to say that, but it also, I think it's kind of true.
Oh, I really, really appreciate you sharing so much. It's so exciting to connect with you and like just have you talking about your story. And it's just reminding me of, how I felt like a boy, too. And I have forgotten about that. But um, yeah, I think it's such a work in progress. And I think that as a community, we are going to grow, of mixed race adopted people. And I think that there's a lot to look forward to in terms of like the discovery process. So thank you so much for this conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.